Hi there, gang. Happy Tuesday night here. It's Brian. How are you? I'm well. Thank you all for the very nice and kind letters and the outpouring of affection. And my goodness, how kind and very nice you're all being to me. And I appreciate that. And I want to especially say to the during the many years on the Morning Answer and on other radio stations that are quote conservative radio stations, I used to say to people when I would be asked, or sometimes maybe I'd even offer it without being asked, I'd say the nicest compliment, or the most, not the most, but in many ways the most meaningful compliment I could receive is, "Hey Brian, I don't agree with you all the time. In fact, most of the time. But I love to listen to you." Because that's what matters the most, right? It matters that we have a connection that sustains us beyond any political issue of the day, which, and some of the political issues of the day were the issues of the day decades ago, but many of them are not. So the connection that we have, first and foremost, before any of that, I certainly believe matters more. Now, during the time of COVID-19 and the early days, and for Jennifer and myself, the earliest days were back in 2019 when we used to do coronavirus updates, and we did that. It was on the Asian continent, and it was not a major story. It was a significant story, but it was not an epidemic in mainland China even at that point. So, then of course, after the first of the year here in the second week of March, of course, when I say here, I mean America, and it was, I believe, March 16, here in Sunday, when many California officials announced those first closures and all of that, and our lives changed. And I always like to draw a distinction that the story here is that human beings, people are getting sick, and some, statistically very few of the number, are losing their lives. I remember early in those early days that the most grim projections were up to 200,000 people could lose their lives, and today the number is over 300,000 Americans that have lost their lives due to COVID-19. It's a very significant number, and it's much higher than the most grim numbers we were told earlier in the year. And of course, each person represents a network of loved ones and families. So first and foremost, that's the story here. That's what's happened. As a result of that, as a result of the threat of that, every life, whether your life or your body has personally been touched by COVID-19, or someone you love, especially in these earliest days when the numbers, of course, were not this high, we were dealing with the very different changes to and rather extreme changes to daily life for all of us who were listening in Southern California at the time. And of course, still those changes are out there. And I understand that news stories, when you talk about them, most of them, certainly when full perspective is being given, they have a beginning, and there's a middle, and there's an end. You can think of the O.J. Simpson trial, for example, just for an example of a huge story that had a beginning and had a middle, and with the verdict, okay, for the sake of discussion, the story had an end there. So on the radio, I'm mindful of that, but was also mindful since the earliest days that we didn't know, and still we don't know, but we have a better feeling about what an ending to the intensity of this might be, or might feel like, or might in fact be. So I started to use a phrase on the radio, and the phrase I used was purposeful because Jennifer didn't have, no one had the Morning Answer listening family, people hearing the show. They also did not have the answers, nor did, and our show's called The Answer, right? So, but much more that doesn't matter, because the answer was this at that time, and it still is. I would say often, sometimes, regularly, I know that we await together the best news, purposefully not saying what that news is, because I didn't know, and arguably we still don't know, but I have an update. The best news, I would say, about this worst thing, and it was comfortable for me to say that because it was purposefully unclear, because all of us were living and are still living with a lack of clarity with regard to this terrible coronavirus. So I'd say the best news about this worst thing, and one day someone asked me, this was not a controversial thing at all, but someone asked me, and it wasn't even on the radio, about that phrase, and I said, well, I don't know what the best news is about this worst thing, but I will be able to identify it when we see it, in my opinion, of course. And I think that we have actually today the worst news about this worst thing, with the very high numbers and over 300,000 people losing their lives. But in what is something that is, the unexpected is symptomatic. I'll use that word, pun intended. The unexpected is symptomatic of this year. So while we do have the worst news of over 300,000 lives, American lives being lost, I think these vaccines are, to date, the best news about this worst thing. I really do think they are. To see medical workers, frontline medical workers, receiving vaccinations that Pfizer, and we have Moderna, and we have efficacy of 95%. I mean, that is this is the best news so far about this worst thing. And I am so happy about that. I think this is wonderful news. And it comes, of course, I've also said on the radio, two things can happen at the same time. So the worst news, reaching very grim numbers and milestones in this timeline, significant. Well, the most grim moments in the timeline of this are happening as the worst, and it is the worst news. At the same time, the best news about this worst thing is that I am watching people get vaccines, and you are too. And I'll leave you with this. Maybe the most memorable phone call that I've ever taken on the radio in any environment came. Jennifer, of course, was with me, and we got a call from Pastor Bill. I remember his name, and he called us about 2 weeks into the closures back in the springtime. And I asked him, since he called, and he's very generous and very kind, very concerned, and very grateful to have the conversation. As certainly we were very grateful to have the conversation with him. And I asked him if there were words that he might offer for some hope. And Jennifer so appropriately said, for some comfort. And the pastor talked about being in Israel, and he would say shalom. And some members of the Jewish community, of the faithful community, would say shalom, shalom. And he said, why do you say it twice? And they said, well, because it means more shalom. And he went on to say that that God does not promise us that everything will be perfect, but we can have His shalom in the midst of it. And I'll never forget that call. I will never forget that call. And he offered the gospel of Jesus, who said, my peace I give you, my peace I leave with you. And I do believe that this is a terrible thing that's going on, and I think we all know that. But I just had to, I guess, in a sense, that broadcasters pay off their teases, as Rick Dees used to say. Pay off your tease. I spent a long time talking about the best news about this worst thing, and I have to say, I think these vaccines, which again, California ordering millions more for the year, and they're coming in again. Two things happening at the same time. They're coming as the numbers are so high, of 300,000, higher than the worst numbers that were talked about earlier in this year. But vaccinations, medical workers cheering because they're receiving a vaccine against COVID-19. The best news so far about this worst thing. So thinking about you, and thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. And also thinking about everyone who is, a thought occurred to me, so I don't, I don't broadcast on AM 870 anymore. And I get all of these nice notes from people. And I have to say that I thought about a lot of folks who have lost work in this terrible year. And I'm thinking about those folks because I feel pretty just flat out lucky, and I feel unworthy of all of these nice things being said when I've lost a lot of my purpose and a lot of work. I'm not without purpose. I have much purpose, but I thought about the tens of millions of Americans who didn't get an email or a tweet about it. It's not fair. That is not fair. I just want to say that because I'm not worthy of the response I've gotten, and the lack of, and the alone feeling that so many people have when they lose their job is not fair. Hope, vaccines, vaccinations, and I just wanted to say that to you. I hope you're having a wonderful week, midweek, Wednesday. Woo! It comes up, in a way it comes up faster than you know it, but in a way it feels like a lot of Saturdays. I'm not crazy about Saturday anymore. Hope you have a wonderful evening, and Merry Christmas, of course, all of that good stuff as well. Thanks. Have a good evening.